What was the scariest we need to leave now gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Serious. Story 1. Attention. Serious tag notice jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit message compose. /AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns. Story 2. My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. Story 3. Doesn't I need to go home now feeling count? And it wasn't me but my mom anyway. I was around 12 or so and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors we all kept to ourselves and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a t-shirt and jeans and something just feels off, so I ignore him and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone. And now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom. Except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet but turned around immediately, found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone, or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day I have no idea what he wanted, and no idea how my mom knew to come home, but I am very grateful she did. Story 4. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and say hello. For some reason though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now. A lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness, because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully he didn't see us hidden and carried on up straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening my mum shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently had just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky me and my sister knew those would so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. Story 5. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion but just for family within reasonable driving distance, probably 30 people altogether. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings, just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside you could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, and other kids' toys etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet and I was full on panic yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car and as soon as I was about to turn the key the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake maybe a few miles in the distance and see a funnel cloud. Got the out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family barbecue thing was completely annihilated. Literally just a slab of concrete and a ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an youve 3. Story 6 Wednesday midday run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer and I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates. 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. Story 7 I bartend and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers. Just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close I was almost finished counting money, so like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta out against me and he's well known around town. He's nuts. Story 8 I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband ex was a Marine and was at work and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook you have to travel along this long dark and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me maybe 50 feet away on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive, but something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved I listened to my instincts that night. Story 9 I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy ABD his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 58 and not a small girl, 13 years old. I was 49 and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there. Just few hours later, the creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. Story 10 I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night and asked my mom if I could just stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was on the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over again. With a hint of panic, I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring really loud. Which wasn't uncommon, but my mom was beside him shaking him and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't obviously. I snuck to their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually the phone call went to the living room and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance. To the middle of nowhere, my dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit suicide. I remember sitting on the floor and holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day or so later, and that is when our world changed. I am very sure if I did not call 911 that night that my dad would have succeeded and it would have probably have drove my mom over the edge as well. And I have no idea why I didn't want to stay the night at my nanny's. I just had that feeling that I needed to go home. Story 11 I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. He, his wife and I were just relaxing and someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon. He opened it up. He was expecting others might come by also. I hear him greeting someone. The guy was his brother I had never met, but had heard about. Very sketchy looking guy, meth teeth, scrawny, long greasy hair. My friend had told me that he had a brother who lived in the area who had a serious drug problem. Buddy is talking to his brother about nothing and the guy gets a call on his cell. Whoever called, all he told them was not yet, he'll call you later. Seems pretty obvious this guy has come to rob and most likely to take out witnesses. I look at my buddy. It seems he has come to the same conclusion. Now my buddy's wife is a no-nonsense type of woman, sweet, but athletic on the tall side. She had left the room to go to the bathroom, or so she said. She comes back in the room with a handgun. I'm thinking WTF did I walk into? But she calmly says, Ron, You're strung out and came here with bad intentions. You need to quietly leave. If you get any ideas, Chris, their son, is sitting outside in his truck to make sure you go. Ron doesn't say a word, he just turns and goes out the door. We can hear his old pickup drive away rapidly. Chris come in and says he's gone. I don't think he's coming back. They ask me to leave so they can decide what to do. They have already called the police, who are well acquainted with Ron. The next morning my buddy calls me. The police said they found his brother in the trailer park where he lived, murdered with multiple gunshots. They are guessing he was in serious drug debt and had come to rob his brother. I told my buddy I was sorry, he said don't be. Story 12 years ago before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m., only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to rape them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Story 13. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. Found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with a gun hiding under his t-shirt. Story 14 years ago I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw two guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club and it took us forever to get in so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me but I picked up my friend's girlfriend. She was barely 5 tall and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside we heard the distant pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update dang. I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. Oh, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend or false? Those two eventually got married and they mentioned me in their speech. Something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. Story 15. I'm a teenage girl who worked at a restaurant pizza shop. I was harassed by these two men one weekend who were totally wasted, so they were kicked. The following weekend they returned, and they tried to sit next to me at counter which is connected to bar but they couldn't so they chose a table across from me and moved both their seats to look right at me, then would only order from my counter instead of our waitresses, were staring at me, making jokes about killing a girl, and kind of just freaking me out. I ended up going to our upstairs employees only section to fold boxes up there all alone down and hallway where nobody would hear me. I ended up feeling sick to my stomach as I heard someone walk up the stairs and whispering and I closed the door and turned my music off and texted me mom. The two followed me up there, then tried to go down then unlocked hallway but another waitress noticed them bothering me and caught them trying to come after me. I just had a gut feeling as I heard them coming and she came down the hallway and told me to be quiet and hold our body weight against the door. We waited for them to leave as they stood there, waiting for me to come out before making some remarks about not knowing where I was then going back down. My dad came and picked me up early because I just felt so off. The following day I had to come in for another shift and as I was clocking out the TVs started playing a true crime documentary on a girl with the same name as me who was kidnapped and assaulted by two men. My stomach dropped and shortly gave my notice after that. I realized I wasn't going to be protected there and wouldn't be surprised if they returned again. Story 16. Standing outside my friend's house watering their garden while they were away on vacation. Not even 30 seconds after I shut the door locked it about 6 men started pounding on the door, reaching in the mail slot trying to unlock said door, telling me to come out calling me cutie other degrading pet names. Story 17. Sitting in my friend's backyard with their 2 kids, my husband, and another friend, enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day with no real wind. We're having a great time, just out of the pool and hungry for pizza, when I suddenly felt on edge. I looked straight at the kids about 8 and 10 or so years old and just said get in the house. We all scrambled and a second later we heard creaking, and maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off of their pine tree onto the table where we were sitting. Thankfully no one was hurt besides having to pick pine needles out of our pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch starting to give. Story 18. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back up, when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting to us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog and could we go back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back towards the forest when little did I know my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly, my sister screams Dad, and to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running towards us and as we turn back around the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door and it's speeding off. Dog still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. Story 19. When I was around 9 or 10 my mom took me with her on a business trip to a nearby city. This is before smartphones when you still had to MapQuest stuff. We were supposed to meet my mom's friend coworker at the mall for something. Since her friend had given her directions, we didn't bother going down to the hotel computer to print directions. I think there was maybe one there. This was around 2000 to 2001. We got lost and ended up pulling into a small storage unit place to pull out a map. It was just 2 rectangular buildings, maybe a total of like 20 units. I don't remember why exactly, but I was really scared and kept crying and asking if we could just go back to the hotel. I assume she got fed up with her kid crying in the passenger seat and she couldn't quite figure out where we were, so we went back to the hotel. The next day they found the bodies of 2 teenagers in one of the units we pulled in front of. Edit to add found the article. Story 20. I was hammock camping while riding my motorcycle through Arkansas. I had a dream that I was getting pulled over by the cops on my bike. The flashing lights were super bright in my eyes. And as I woke from my dream, I noticed my blue hammock tent is lighting up like flashing police lights. I immediately felt an adrenaline spike and went into full flight mode, packed my up faster than I could even put my boots on, hopped on my bike in my underwear and rode a mile to the top of the campground where the showers were. The second I stepped into the shower cabin, the sky opened up and cloud-to-ground lighting started striking trees in the campground every 10 to 15 seconds. I could have been royally up by a lightning strike had I stayed sleeping between 2 of them. Story 21 years ago when I was still living at home with the parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out. However, instead he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him, so I called my dad who was asleep to come down and get me. He did, and when the guy saw my dad he immediately ran away. I was lucky. Story 22. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. Story 23. My little brother and I were tossing a baseball around near dusk at the bottom of our property, 30 wooded mountain acres way in the middle of nowhere. It had gotten dark enough that we were just about to call it quits when we heard the single most horrifying scream we've ever heard coming from the trees just beyond the edge of the clearing. Imagine a woman screaming in mortal agony, writhing in the most wretched torment imaginable. Every tortured scream from horror movies, war movies, anything you've ever heard, nothing compared to this. Even now, decades removed from hearing it, the hair on my arms and neck stands up just thinking of it. And it's made even worse by the realization of what it actually was: a mountain lion. Full-grown female mountain lions scream loudly when they're in heat, and it sounds like a human woman being torn to pieces by the devil himself. To hear that, 2 kids alone in the dark in the middle of nowhere, was about as terrifying as it gets. I grabbed his arm and ran. Scrambled. Fear levitated up the hill faster than ever before or since. It's been 25 years, and I still haven't fully unpuckered. This is a good example of the kind of sound from a trail cam video. Make sure to play loudly in the dark. Story 24. Surfing a fairly secluded reef break, offshore across a channel. This place is in a very southern state of Australia. Overcast weather, but a still amazing day for the waves. I was surfing with only one other guy. We were trading waves and getting to know each other in between sets. I asked what he did for a living and he was a marine biologist, who had both recently moved to the area and were new to surfing it as well, despite it being extremely good surf. After 40 minutes he says, "I don't like this, something feels off, I feel like I'm being watched, like I'm bait." I didn't want to leave as it was excellent surf. But this guy was a marine biologist, so I took his instinct as a sign to play it safe. We paddled back across the deep channel together as quickly as we could without panicking, and walked the 15 minutes trek back to the car park talking the whole way. I got his mobile number for future surfs together. Given how small town it is here and not knowing anyone, we noticed a 15-foot inflatable boat pull up near the reef and hang around for a bit without much thought. Later that night, while looking at my social media, I read about 3 fishermen at the same location we were at that morning, at the same time, in their boat as they pulled up to check their cray pots on the beach side of the reef. They were circled twice by a great white shark that was as big as their boat. That guy most likely saved me from a horrible experience that day. I messaged him with a link to the Facebook page with the comments regarding their experience. Chills ran through my body for a good 20 minutes. He was adamant he felt the presence of something, and he was right. Story 25. A friend called me and said there's a wildfire 8 miles away. Can you help me move my horses? So I drove down. She was wrong. It's 8 miles by car, under 2 as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. The second set, I'm working on, and suddenly, things get quiet. It's as if the world stopped for a minute. I look at the horse and the horse looks like it's ready to run. I take a deep breath and suddenly, the noise comes back, the wind is hot AF, and the light changes. I told Sherry, the girl I'm helping, we gotta go now. No time to shove the horses into the trailer. They are smart enough to survive, and I let him loose. We run to the truck, and the barn is already on fire. Then we get in the truck and notice the fire past us and is blocking the road, so we jump out and ran to a small pond for the horses, and we dive in, hoping the fire doesn't burn us. It was about 20 minutes of, it might have been longer, It was insanely scary, hot and loud. We got rescued by the fire department's water-dropping helicopter. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We got lucky. The truck was burned to the frame, and the horse Sherry let go died. The one I let go survived but was burned. That's most likely the scariest moment. Story 26. Many years ago, I went with my then girlfriend to one of her female friends' houses, who was married to a guy I'd never met before. You'll call them Jack and Jill so I can tell the story a little easier. We played cards with them for a couple hours and it was a good time besides an odd feeling I had the whole time I was there. Something just didn't sit right with me being there with them in their home. The best I can explain it is that I was having an anxiety nervous-like feeling, but having no reason to feel that way. After leaving I told my girlfriend the feeling I had and that I didn't think we should go back there again because something wasn't right. Fast forward several months to a year or so later, I forget the exact timeline. Jack murders Jill in that same home, Mag dumping her with his semi-automatic pistol before killing himself with one of the last rounds. No motive, really horrible stuff that sent shockwaves through the community, and it's the only time I've ever had that feeling. Story 27. I was an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan. One night we were on a foot patrol along the outskirts of a town where we were concerned about Taliban activity. I decided to move in closer to get a look at the place without worrying about the people of the town coming and going, which is always stressful. It was about 3 a.m. so everyone was asleep. It was completely silent. My interpreter carried an FM radio that he used to monitor non-secure traffic, which is how the Taliban tended to communicate back then. We hear something in Pashto on his radio, and he very calmly turns to me and says, "Sir, they are saying the ambush is set." I immediately got on my radio and told my squad leaders to halt, and we pulled back and got the out of Dodge. That was probably the most pucker I have felt in combat. I am convinced that interpreter saved several lives that night, and when he messaged me during the fall of Kabul asking if I could get his family out, I called every contact I could think of to make sure he got on a flight. They currently live in Seattle where he works in IT. Story 28. I was camping in eastern Arizona with a friend of mine. We like to hike in this particular area that's fairly isolated. We found a place probably 14 or 15 miles deep into the forest on small quad bike trails and set up camp for the night. We put out our fire and go into our tents. Probably about 15 minutes go by. I'm reading a book on my phone and what can I only describe as a roar sounds like it's about 50 feet away from our campsite. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I had immediate goosebumps and went into full panic mode. My friend and I both get out of our tents, look around and don't see anything because it's dark but run as fast as we can and just hop in the car, immediately drove off and found a motel about an hour drive away. I will never forget that sound. I've seen bears in real life and looked up what a bear roar sounds like and it was nothing like it. The one we heard was almost high-pitched and just filled me with immediate dread. No clue to this day what it was, but I am glad we noped the out of there. We came back the next day and everything was as we left it other than the coals in the fire were spread around a bit. There was no wind that night, so I don't know what happened. I haven't gone back to that area since and I have no desire to. Whatever made that noise definitely didn't want us there. Story 29. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking out the windows. We all look at each other quiet, and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes because something feels really off. A few minutes later we hear someone shout, and as I turned around there was about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in hands. We ran so fast. Nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Story 30. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom. Can we just duck inside this subway real quick? I promise it'll be quick." About a minute later there was a shootout just up the block. If we wouldn't have gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident waiting to cross the street. Story 31. A shady-looking guy told me to come here when I was waiting for my mom under the apartment building. I was about 10. I ran upstairs immediately without looking back. Looking back as a 25-year-old, I couldn't imagine why any normal adult would need to speak to a random 10-year-old unless the kid looks lost or is doing something dangerous. Glad I bolted. Story 32. About a year and a half ago, I got out of a concert hall and I was with my FWB, her friend and her friends. We walked across the busy street to a bar, 2:30 a.m. around this time, got a quick tequila shot, and a drink to end the night and we left to call the Uber. We were sitting on the side of the road on a curb waiting for the Uber and there was a group of people that walked to our side. They just looked like bad news and they were just looking to cause problems. I look at my FWB and pulled her up. She looks at me like WTF at first, and then she saw the "we need to GTFO" look in my eyes, so she turned around and said we are going to the other two. Once we got up, not 5 seconds later bang 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 bang, and I felt like I got a painful splinter in the back of my leg, but we ran to the cop car across the street to get some cover. Turns out, I got a fragment of the curb that we were sitting on where the bullet hit exactly where we were sitting in my calf. It was a wild shot that just happened to hit where we were sitting. Unfortunately, someone died that night and my gut feeling saved my friends or myself from a fatal gunshot that wasn't even intended for us. The only reason I knew about a piece of stone embedded in my leg, and it wasn't just a muscle pull from running, was because a cop responding and running by us while we were standing behind the cop car, and he saw blood on my leg and thought I got shot. A quick statement and ER visit to fish out the half marble-sized shard of stone in my calf while absolutely wasted, and I was on my way home at 6 o'clock a.m. I didn't really put it all together until I got home thinking, holy, I can't believe I'm alive right now.